shame is your enemy and it will kill your relationship. So how can you be affirming and acknowledging to the person and create the bond of belief? And again, not the belief that they can do the job perfectly, but a belief that they can grow, a growth mindset.
This is Exploring Leaders, episode 31, with Institute of Coaching's founder, Professor Carol Kauffman. Carol will share her story and her experience from coaching many of the world's top CEOs, leaders, and board members, inspiring you to take responsible leadership in the digital age.
Do you wonder how trailblazing leaders sense at scale, evolve to innovate, and align the actions in this increasingly digital world? Welcome to the Exploring Leaders podcast. The experienced team at Digoshen interviews leaders from around the world for insights and inspiration on how to lead in the digital age. In this episode, Digoshen founder Liselette Engstam, who is also an independent board chair and director, researcher, author, and advisor, asks the questions.
Our guest today is Carol Kauffman. Carol is an international renowned coach, founder of the Institute of Coaching, professor at Harvard, and senior advisor at Egon Zehnder. Carol is passionate about guiding leaders through reflection and insights. This episode focuses on her perspectives and approaches she finds useful for the top leaders and boards. She also shares with us the insights on the MOVE model documented in her latest book, Real-Time Leadership, and how boards can better guide their CEOs and their board members.
Warm welcome to the podcast, Carol Kauffman. It's lovely to have you here.
I'm glad to be here.
And you are a lot of different things, but you're really known for your coaching skills and your research skills. So you are a professor at Harvard, you are here at Egon Zehnder, and you're leading some of your work with them. And you've done phenomenal things that actually have made you into coming into the top positions of coaching in the world. However, you and I actually got in contact through the Institute of Coaching, which you founded. What is a common myth about your job?
That's a good question. Common myth about the job. I think there's many common myths. One is that coaches are only supposed to ask questions, which I think is incorrect. I believe that it's a combination. So think of the figure 8. So let's say now you're one of your board chairs and you want to be coaching someone. One, I can give you a 3-minute coach approach, but I'll stay with this first, which is how do you make an offer of what it is you think the person could do, but then pull from the person. Say, what do you think of that? You know, tell me more about what, if I was a 10 out of 10 as a board chair or as a CEO, what would I look like? What would you want to see? So how to kind of be pulling, then making your offer or your comment, and then saying, does that land with you? So this sort of give and take, not just question, because I think it's an art form to be able to do both, to bring together leadership advisory and coaching.
I think you're absolutely right. So it's also a trust thing that you actually go a bit back and forth. I think that establishes trust in a very different way.
Yeah, one of the things we think about is as we try to source coaches for people, and I say there's just one thing you need to look at. Would this coach be comfortable hanging out in an airport lounge with board chairs or CEOs? And if the answer is yes, that's just completely necessary. It may not be sufficient, but I think that's it. You have to be able to overcome your own ego, need to be smart or whatever, and to just show up as a human being and be comfortable with other beings.
And it's interesting, but that's still very hard for a lot of people to be comfortable with yourself.
Yes. Yes. So you have to do a lot of personal growth. Egon Zehnder did a study recently, a survey of 1,000 CEOs, and like their annual income was $4 trillion. So these are fairly significant CEOs. And one of the questions they asked is how much do you agree with the statement, my personal transformation is essential for my organizational transformation? And 90% of the 1,000 CEOs strongly agreed. But what's really interesting is 3 years earlier, it was 3 times 3 years earlier. It went from 30% thinking that to 90% thinking about that. And those who agreed, not strongly agreed, but just agreed, that took it up to 97%. So in terms of the world of coaching and leadership advisory, it's just a sea change. Really, really
Right.
changed.
And it's also very, very complex job on both sides. To
Yes.
actually lead a company is complex, but to coach a person that is leading a company is also complex.
Mhm.
So it goes both ways. So I, of course, wanted to talk to you a bit about the book. And I
Mhm.
understand it's called Real Time Leadership.
Mhm.
And you wrote it with David Noble.
Yes.
So can you tell me, what was it that made you decide to write it? Why now?
Well, so David Noble and I are kind of this dream team where, I'm sort of the Harvard academic on one hand, but I have like 40,000 hours of coaching experience and I love it more than anything. David has become a coach and he's a very good one, but he was the CEO of the world's first digital bank. He had major operating executive positions, managing directors of this and that and strategy, etc. So this is really the brainchild of both of us. So the book is part great stories, it's part great leadership advisory, and it's got a lot of good business in it. So really it came out of our relationship and our coaching leaders in some extremely complex situations with complex personalities. We do coaching together. We call it
Oh, wow.
2-on-1 coaching.
And what does that mean?
And so it means, so if you're a major CEO and you're having a strategy meeting, how often does one strategist show up? Never. So when you're talking about something so powerful as, really powerful coaching that will swivel where an organization is going, why limit yourself to one coach? And so in this case, we work together. And, while I may be aware of a lot of the how issues, we'll also then go back and forth with, how is your team doing? Tell us about the strategy. So we will do both together.
I think that's so fascinating. I love working in teams almost with everything. I think it's,
Yes.
I think 1 + 1 makes 3.
Yes. We do a lot of team coaching as
Right.
well.
I think it's very interesting. So in this book, you, or for the research that you did prior to the book, but developed for the book, you have a framework called MOVE. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. So let me tell you first, the entire title of the book is Real-Time Leadership. Find your winning moves when the stakes are high. So the question is, how do you find those winning moves? Like, what are they? And this model that we have developed helps you kind of pull it together and to have an operating system, really. So the premise behind it is that we all need to be able to rise above our reflexes. Really experienced CEOs and board chairs, you have your playbook of what's really worked. But the issue is it's really worked up till now. So for 90% of the time, 95% of the time, that playbook may be fine. But in real time, you have to be open to what is different. So the model is MOVE. So I'll just name it and then go through it. So M is for being mindfully alert. And that is mindfully alert the way that a tennis player has to be alert or a basketball player, like really scanning what's going on around you, but being open. O is for options generator, which is one of the things I've done in my coaching is for any challenge someone is facing, you should be able to come up with 4 pathways forward. And as a coach and as someone who's not actually running a company, I don't necessarily know which one it is, but I want them to be available to that leader. So to be mindfully alert, and then mindfully alert to what? It's to the external goals, your internal goals, and your relationship goals. So that answers 3 questions, which is, what do you need to do? Who do you need to be? How do you need to relate? Now we'll double click on those with 4 ways to manage and approach each one of those problems. And I can go into that later. But then V is to really be clear on your vantage point.
Right.
Should you be high up, low up, close up? What kind of biases are impacting your ability to see around you? And are the things behind you that are going to kill you? That if you don't find out what you don't know, you are in trouble. So that's the vantage point. And then E is to affect and engage change. So as a leader, how do you send out the right leadership signals, hear the echoes back, and then work on affecting change? So that is the model in a nutshell.
And I think it's a fantastic, really fascinating model. Both because we are meeting so much change right now.
You can check out more hints and tips in the blog post covering this podcast episode of Exploring Leaders at the Digoshen blog, which you can find at digoshen.com.
It's never been as uncertain as it is right now. But also that, which is a particular challenge for boards actually, and that is you can't control things anymore. You need to guide things. You need to try to influence things. And that's also where it seems very handy with the vantage points and the engage.
I actually feel for board chairs. I think it's such a difficult and complex and meaningful role. And one of the things I think that is so difficult and powerful, and the best ones do it, is to rise above your reflexes. Because so often you could see something and you're like, no, don't do that. But it's like, wait a minute, I've got a whole, the whole board here. How do you do that? And then how do you really establish the ideal relationships with the people on your board and understand something that I call the platinum rule, which is the golden rule is wrong. The golden rule is treat others as you would want to be treated. That would be really fine if everyone was like you. However, the platinum rule is treat others as they would want to be treated, which may not be what you would want. So I think as a board chair, you have this tremendous responsibility, but you also have to hold the room in a way. Like so much of what a board chair is doing is invisible. It's invisible. And it's hard work to create an environment where innovation can happen, where people can have a voice, but not be activated. So I think that rising above your reflex and having those 4 ways to lean in or lean back or lean with, don't lean with the people in the boardroom is just crucial and really hard.
It's really, really hard. And I wanted to start with following your fantastic breath there with the chair. Let's start with just the relationship between the chair and the CEO when the chair is independent. What do you think the chair can do to establish a really good relationship, and what can they do from coaching?
Okay. So the first, second, and third thing that will help you as a board chair is to develop a bond with the CEO. That's first, second, and third. If you can develop a bond, okay, now how do you do that? So one way to do that is to really discipline yourself to think about the strengths of this leader. Because the flaws are going to you'll see the flaws, that's your job. But negative things are like Velcro and your attention will stick to them. Positive things are like Teflon and your attention will slide away. So you really have to, number one, really see the strengths of that person. And then you want to have faith in them. Well, faith in what? Because they may not have all the skills they need, but to really be clear, the faith that this person can develop.
Right.
Then, this will sound wonky, but I'll say it in psychobabble, then explain it. You want to activate the parasympathetic nervous system of the other person. What do I mean by that? So basically, we all have reward and threat, just like we were talking about, how do you create a positive environment, which is one where you avoid the threat, avoid shaming the person, particularly if they're first-time CEO or first time in something big. Shame is your enemy and it will kill your relationship. So how can you be affirming and acknowledging to the person and create the bond of belief? And again, not the belief that they can do the job perfectly, but a belief that they can grow, a growth mindset rather than, as Carol Dweck talks about, a fixed mindset. And that is by, a lot of it is by what you emanate. So I had one guy, I love this story. He had the psychological insight of a gnat. Quite literally, he didn't have an activation system.
Right.
So literally, when he was at one point in a fighter pilot in a jet, wrong, a helicopter, and it's like tanking, he doesn't feel anything. He just copes and does it. So we talked about, he goes, how do I make my people feel? Like, what can I emanate? I don't have emotions. I asked my wife. And it did turn out it was very interesting neurologically. So we came up with an exercise, which was when he was about to see someone, and it wasn't a glass door, he would put his hand on the doorknob. And before he could open the door, he had to think, what are 3 things about this person I respect or that I admire? Now, it could also be that he was unhappy with that person for not delivering or whatever. You don't have to pretend that's not true. But how to really think, what are 3 things I admire about this CEO and what he has done? And keep that in mind. And then when you start a conversation from that headset, the other person picks it up. It's viral.
Yeah.
Just like if you're like, I don't think this guy's going to make it. That's viral. Don't think you can hide it. But it's a discipline to really think through, what are this person's assets? What's right about them? When have I seen them at their best? And stay with that to establish that relationship. And then there's interpersonal openness.
Which goes both ways.
Exactly.
One of the things that has happened here during the pandemic is that most chairs had to cope with things they had no idea of. But
Yes.
they also had to cope with CEOs that has never been part of anything like this either. But the board group, you have to, and that includes my own chairmanship, you would always have people on your board that goes panic on different things. So how do you think that the board can try to get the group together and focused and try to balance out this thing with a couple of people always panicking around things? Because the reason I ask it is, it would just become more and more common because of the uncertainty of the world. It's not going away. So how can a chair coach their board?
Okay. I'm going to actually put the coach the board to the side because I have a particular model I can share about that next. But for this one, so we just talked about how positive emotion is viral. Anxiety is even more viral. And so the first job is don't catch it. Now, we were talking about anxiety being contagious. So just as we were talking before that positive emotion can be contagious, what you emanate is powerful. And that goes again into the second dimension of leadership, inside myself. Who can I be at this moment that could help my board settle down? That is as important as anything you do. So one thing is, okay, how can I be a good influence? And no, that's not do a good influence. So first step is not to catch it, and to appreciate that anxiety is viral and to appreciate that the person is afraid and to help create that environment where that person can feel safe. So you don't want to tell the person, stop being anxious, but how do you then frame it as, our challenges are big and they're unlike anything we have ever done before, but we are all smart and competent people. We will be able to figure this out together. And if you think you can do it yourself alone, no wonder you feel anxious.
Yeah.
because this can't be solved by one person. So it's don't catch the anxiety. Ask yourself that second, dimension, which is who do I want to be? Then the third dimension of how do I want to relate, being mindfully alert to those things. And that can help tilt towards say, but whatever you do, don't shame the person who's anxious or tell them they shouldn't be anxious, but to do and affirm. And then to say, together, we will move things forward.
Right. I think that's excellent way. And some chairs probably have it natural, and some other chairs try to sweep things away. And as you're saying, it rarely helps in that sense. You were saying that you had thought around the model,
A coaching model.
Yeah, that a chair
Yes.
could use.
I would love to. Now, I'm going to describe this using some numbers, but you don't have to use the numbers. Of course, I call it coach by numbers, so a little hard. But you can also call it the 10 of 10 conversation. So what is coaching in a nutshell? Coaching is looking towards the future, helping someone identify their strengths, and then navigating that journey with questions. Yes, offerings at time, but more like 80-20 if you can, pulling from the other person.
To get even more value out of the podcast series Exploring Leaders, you can find everything from research reports to advice and courses at the Digoshen website, which you can find at digoshen.com.
So the coaching conversation would look like this. So the first thing is, what does the person want to work on? Why don't you give me an example of something a board chair may want or need to work on?
How should we balance short and long term?
Okay, great. So what's interesting about that is, the three dimensions of leadership are external, internal, and interpersonal. And the model works on all three.
Right.
So balancing short term. Then my next question would be, why does that matter to you?
If we only attack the short term, we might go in the wrong direction.
Okay, perfect. So then the coaching is 4 questions. So this may be something you talk about with your group. It could be something, say, you talk about with the CEO themselves. And so that might be, so, hey, if you were, or if we were at 10 out of 10 on balancing the short term and the long term, what would we look like? What would be doing, what would be seeing, but really painting a vivid picture of that. Like, what would it look like at its best? And there's a lot of research behind this that I can share, but that's question number 1. Then question number 2, say for the CEO, would be, so in terms of balancing that long-term and short-term, if this is a 10, what would you rate yourself now? And so let's say they rated themselves a 6. Now, the question that counts is the next question, which is, what are we, or what is the CEO doing right that they are a 6 and not a 5 or a 5.5? And you approach that with the intensity that you would be asking questions if there was a blow up. Like, why didn't you see that opportunity? And what do you think happened here? As opposed to, so what did you do right? What were you seeing? What were you doing? What else were you doing right? What else were you doing right? And then when the person looks blank, you do one more. What else were you doing right? Because again, if you ask what are the things you did wrong, that is neurologically and cognitively easier to identify.
Right.
Identify what you've done right is harder. It's sort of anti-evolutionary. It's overcoming your reflex, basically. So you keep asking, what have you done right? What have you done right? Then the last question is, so if we think about our strategy or whatever over the next whatever period of time makes sense, 2 months, 4 months, what could you do to get from a 6 to a 6.5?
Right.
And then build on that. And each step of that has like a huge amount of research support behind it. And if I did it all, you'd fall into a coma.
Well, I'm not sure I would, but I think it's a super good way, because it's also a very good way for the chair to actually use the power of the group, to have the group build up these complex questions, because sometimes you end up there's 2-3 people talking and the rest are not talking very much. But this is
Yeah,
a
you
very
can
inclusive-
round robin
Yeah.
this, where, let the extroverts have their say first, but don't stop there.
Right.
So what for each person? Because the introverts will need a little more time.
Yeah.
So for that group, you could even, if you have a lot of introverts in your group, to sort of say, like give them a little warm up, like, so listen, I'm going to ask if we were a 10 out of 10 on blah, blah, blah. Or if you want to bring it up, it comes up in the meeting.
Right.
You can arrange it to be like before a break, to say, listen, I'd love for you all to think about if we were a 10 out of 10 on balancing short-term and long-term, what might that look like? And why don't you just give that a little mull over as we have our break? And then the introverts can catch up.
Right. And I love all of these actually moving, and not necessarily moving it with a full breakthrough, but moving it a bit step by step. So making sure that you take steps. And I wanted to just do one dive into this, the first thing that you said of not overreacting, the first step in the move that you actually have to sense and then create options. Can you say something more about that?
Sure. So the first part is the mindfully alert, where literally just naming what is it that I need to accomplish? What is it that I need to be? How do I need to relate? So I'll start out with first the CEO, and he's in our book. He's called Matt. And what happened with Matt was he believed his external demand was to blow the board away with how much he knew.
Right.
So he talked and he talked and he talked. And then when the board started having it like, I look, he then doubled down and did it more. And he was really losing them. And he just tried to maintain good posture and lead with dignity. And then he called us and said, help. So David and I, help. And then we also heard from the chair who went,
What happened?
he was our number one. We have an external candidate who is now looking a little better to us. So in our work with Matt, it was like, first of all, really getting him like, what was your real goal? Your goal was to show them how smart you were. What was another goal? And of course, the other goal was to have the board be engaged.
Yeah.
And to say, well, how many messages can this poor board absorb? Like, not the 20, what are the 3? So how can you narrow down? And then what could he do to kind of settle himself down? And in his case, he felt like he had to shut down his caring side. And I think a lot of that is drummed out of leaders. If I show how much I care about people. So it was also to be more comfortable with himself. And then third, when he got to the board meeting, how to realize that his job, like they already wanted him to be CEO. It was his to lose, and he was losing. But to just connect with them and, see things from their point of view, back to vantage point. He was looking from his point of view, not their point of view. But he was also looking at it from the point of view as a CEO aspirant rather than, wait, I am the CEO.
Yeah.
And how can I talk from that vantage point? So with him, happily, he was actually able to make those changes. And so day 2, a different Matt showed up. And they were quite pleased. And also just the fact that he could pivot.
Yeah.
They knew he was getting some coaching and then he could pivot. And it wasn't just a pretend pivot.
So I find this very interesting. And I also hope that based on our conversation, that a lot of chairs and a lot of board members will pick up your book. Because I think we will be much more successful using a bit more of the coaching approaches, both within the boardroom, but also with management, to actually get to our final result.
That would be great.
So one question that I have that links to this, and that is, have you found a question? I usually say the best tool a board member has is asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
So have you found a particular question really good when you work with leaders and boards?
I know the one question I usually ask, I'm not sure how this would translate yet to the board, but when I start a coaching engagement, instead of a super long assessment, just I meet them and basically ask, how can I be of the most service to you right now?
Right.
And so to have that headset. And maybe what's most important is the question the chair asks him or herself beforehand, which is who do I want to be as the chair of this meeting right now? Not what do I want to do? Not even how do I want to relate, but who do I want to be at this meeting? And how can just pausing and asking that question gives you more freedom to choose?
A very good way, and actually as useful for any board member in that. So, you have looked and worked with a lot of people. Is there any leader you think that we should keep our eyes on and be inspired by? Maybe there's some illustration in the book that we can look for.
Yes, actually, the very last chapter is called Be Extraordinary. And what that is how do you really, achieve your goals, be who you want to be, relate, have the capacity to choose, look at your vantage point and affect and engage in change, and really think about when you're thinking about choosing someone as a CEO, those can almost be like a kind of a checklist that you could think about is, who they are, what they do, how they relate. And so I'm trying to think of a leader who isn't one of my clients. I actually thought President Obama was a lovely leader in a lot of ways. He definitely could have leaned in more and been more aggressive. But I think the moment of grace, sort of this one moment in his leadership, was when he was being sworn in, and the judge just got the oath all wrong. He then basically did not shame the judge at all,
Right.
and basically helped the judge, go through the oath. But later, when he was asked about it, he just said, "Yeah, well, we worked it out." Right. So I think one of the things I'm looking for, the most important way to assess someone is, do they have self-awareness and self-responsibility?
Right.
Basically, do they take responsibility for their successes in a good way, not over the top, but also when things go wrong, how to really, what percentage of it is me, my team, or the organization. So I think the best leaders are able to do that.
Right. When people are now getting curious about the book, where could they find it and how could they reach out and maybe follow you?
So to follow me is just my name. Google Carol Kauffman, 2 F's, 1 N, and you will come to my website, bunches of resources, which include the book. And we just come up with a new website also called Real-Time Leadership Institute.com. And then, of course, if you read HBR, Harvard Business Review is publishing the book. And so they'll have things on their website as well.
That's wonderful. I always end up asking people in the end of it a different question. And I'm going into a new trend. And this trend is very nicely illustrated actually behind you. And that is, if you were an art form, what would you be and why?
I recently saw an incredible art form, and it was as follows. Imagine a big building with pillars, okay? And then imagine a light show where you could actually show things like fish swimming through the water, different designs, looks of storms. So I think I would be a light show.
I think that's fantastic. Thank you so much for spending time with us, and we wish you all success with the book and looking forward to continue to collaborate.
Excellent. I'd love that too. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Exploring Leaders, a podcast produced by Digoshen with the ambition to inspire insightful leadership in the digital age. If you found this episode interesting, join the momentum to amplify the voices of trailblazing leaders by sharing it with others for inspiration. For any questions or recommendations on other inspiring leaders you like to listen to, contact us via our website, Digoshen.com, or via social media as LinkedIn or Twitter.